Hello and welcome everyone to this free Ingenta webinar from SciencePOD. Today's guest speaker is Sabine Louët, a media entrepreneur and science communicator, journalist, editor, and who has a keen interest in how best to use technology to deliver improved publishing solutions. Sabine has built a well-established international career in science and technology, publishing in the past 20 years. She has worked for international science publishing houses, including the Nature Publishing Group in London and New York, now part of Springer Nature, and a strategic pharma intelligence publishing houses, including Windover in Newark, Connecticut, now part of Informa, and Shanghai, China-based GBI Health. In 2014, she founded SciencePOD, which stands for Science Prose on Demand. She noticed that in the science and technology sector, the way scientists and professionals working in technology communicated was not always optimum. This meant that valuable research findings and exciting technological advances were not communicated widely to those who matter, including policymakers, potential collaboration partners, and the wider publishers. She developed the SciencePOD platform to connect communities of science and technology writers and editors with scientific organizations and industries interested in using its talent management tool, combined with a workflow management solution. She holds honors in MSc Maîtrise in Fundamental Physics from the University of Strasbourg in France, and an MSc in Science Communication from Imperial College in London, UK. In 2006, she has been awarded the Science Journalism Laureate Award from Purdue University, USA, for services to science communication. She speaks fluent English and French and has a good working knowledge of German and Spanish. I will now pass you over to Sabine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this glowing introduction. Welcome to all of you to this seminar. I'm delighted to be presenting how SciencePOD helps publishers and librarians raise the profile of the published research that they produce. So as Mike said, I'm the founder and CEO of SciencePOD, and we're a company who is very much mission-based. So our mission is to make research findings accessible to wider audiences at post-publication stage. So we very much intervene at the very end of the process that brings publishers to publish research papers. So how do we do that? We make sense of research finding buried in the literature by translating them into clear, concise, and compelling messages. That way, they become accessible to people who are not expert in the field of the research paper or the academic book that we're covering. So this could be scientists from other disciplines. It also matters to policymakers, funders, potential business partners from industry, but also in the case of life science, it matters to patients or to wider public. Today, there's a bit of misconception as to where innovation comes from in our industry. And when I started my company, I was under the impression that large publishers had a lot of money invested in developing the latest technology with colorful websites and flashy animations to serve the community of researchers. And guess what? Some of them do, but by and large they don't. And that's the reality on the ground. So I really looked into further identifying where innovation might be coming from. And interestingly, in January 2019, I came across the work of a Dutch independent consultant in scholarly publishing called Yvonne Kampfens. And we have an interview of Yvonne in our blog at sciencepod.org if you want to find out a bit more about her study. But essentially, she started from the assumption that most people thought that startups in our industry were being acquired by large publishers. And there was not much happening outside large publishers and innovation and startup. And it turned out that the reason why people had that misconception was that because there was a lot of publicity around this sort of acquisition. In fact, she did a very focused study on 120 startups who were actually part of the study. Out of the 77% of the startups she surveyed, so 92 out of 120, she found existed totally independently from large publishers. And of the 23 among the 120 samples she surveyed, 77% of those were acquired by company outside our industry. So this really goes to show that a lot of innovation may not come from industry itself. And you can look at the data I have on the screen here, which really shows who are the top performer in terms of fundraising and in terms of revenue. So you can dive into that study by looking at the URL. You're very welcome to go into that. And what this is really telling us is that we are already seeing the signs that there's bound to be companies in the startup ecosystem that will work across company, across industry, and hopefully not in a not so distant future, we're bound to see a Spotify or an Airbnb for the publishing and the information industry. So this is just to give you a sense of the context in which we operate. Now, as part of my journey as an entrepreneur, I learned to ask the right question. And one of the questions that I had to ask at the beginning is, what is the driver, the biggest driver of change in our industry? Is open access the biggest driver of change? And if you consider that this lovely bird on the screen has a very widely open beak, you might consider that open access is actually the end all and be all. It turns out that open access is not quite as popular as the number of column inches we have online make you believe. There was a study published in 2017 by independent publishing consultancy Delta Think, and they found that since open access was launched as a concept in 2002 with the Budapest Open Access Initiative, its implementation and adoption only represented 20% of the total article output in volume. And this means that at best, this was 10% of the market value. So although open access is indeed a driver of change in our industry, it's not as fast as it as some people might believe might be. So I looked into this open access trend a bit further, and I realized that pretty much open access is not driven by scientists themselves by and large, but it's now driven by funders. I mean, Plan S is a classic example whereby the European Commission has decided to start throwing a spanner in the works so that people react and start adopting open access on a wider scale. And this is why they've come up with a set of 10 guiding principles. And by the way, Europe is not the only one going in that direction. In China and in India, we've seen some signal that there's a raised awareness that open access is the next thing for the publishing industry. So this is all very well to have all these guiding principles and policymakers and funders thinking, we need to push in that direction. But the reality is this is making a lot of people uncomfortable. And that's because we all wonder what shape open access will actually take. And there's been some element of answer to that question. We've seen a few interesting deals coming through. If you take, for example, in January 2019, Wiley announced that they had made a deal with the German consortium representing most of the research institutions called the Project Deal. And that was a 30 million deal. And that really shows that country-level deals between publishers and consortia could be one of the ways that open access is going to take root. 2 years prior to that, in 2017, EDP Science had already announced that they made a nationwide deal with a French consortium for academics called Couperin. And so that really suggests that this is not the last of these deals. And I'm aware that there's a lot of work happening behind the scene to go in that direction as well. Now, it's all very well to have national deals, but that doesn't work with everyone, and not everyone is in a position to get involved in a national deal for open access. So what we've noticed is there are also some independent operators, mainly startups like Knowledge Unlatched in Berlin, who position themselves as a broker between groups of librarians of similar academic focus who are teaming up to purchase bundles of open access articles to publishers. So there's a kind of brokerage happening between librarians and publishers. And the benefit of this kind of bundle approach to open access is to give people a lot of choice and flexibility, which really is a different approach to the old subscription model in our industry. So at SciencePOD, we've been observing this because we very much like that bundle approach because ourselves, we sell bundles of content to publishers at the post-publication stage to make sure that they can tell the story of what's buried in the research that they publish and bring some more attention to the work they publish. A lot of our publishing clients consider this to be part of their author services, or they use it as part of their content marketing activities. And of course, there's always the advantage when you start, telling the story of what's happening in research papers, what the research findings actually are, is that it gives greater accountability to funders, to taxpayers, and to the wider public. So there's a bigger corporate social responsibility aspect to doing this sort of activity. But let us not forget that one of the main beneficiaries to this sort of approach is the author themselves, because there's quite a lot of value for authors. In this new open access context, authors increasingly feel the need to be noticed because they're no longer relying solely on the journal impact factor as a way of getting noticed. As you might have seen, there's a lot more individual scientists trying to promote their own work directly. So instead of having the journal as a brand, they're relying on their own name as a brand. And the witness to this is the emergence of altmetrics to measure how well they stand out of the crowd. They also increasingly make use of these social media networks for scientists who are really embodying the new way that scientists themselves communicate with each other and with wider audiences. And more than ever, these scientists need to tell their story through those networks. So there's a lot of evidence to see that the social media network for scientists are very popular. And in addition to that, people tend to rely on LinkedIn and Twitter and these sort of more professional tools to also share their research. And that's a trend that we've witnessed quite a lot. So in a way, SciencePOD is positioned in a unique place to serve the need of these authors who increasingly want to communicate beyond the inner circle of their peers, and yet they are not always equipped with the communication skills, with the writing skills to make their message clear and easy to understand to lay audiences. And this is why they may rely on us, either directly or indirectly through their institution or the publishers. So this is an example I have on the screen now of a research paper, which is featured on the bottom of the screen, turned into an infographic. So what we've done is we've put together a team of a writer, a designer, an editor, and a proofreader to extract the core message from that particular research paper and portray it in the simplest term using images, which are sometimes more powerful than words, as you might know, but also making sure that every piece of information that's included in this infographic is scientifically accurate. And we always check with the author of the original piece of work that what we've portrayed is scientifically accurate. And this is a very important part of what we do, because to get trusted content in a world where there's a lot of fake news, a lot of misinformation, is priceless. So I'm going to now give you a few more examples of things we've done. We're working, for instance, with one of the portfolio of physics journal called European Physical Journal that belongs to Springer Nature. And we do 300-word summaries of their most interesting papers. On the left-hand side of the screen, we had a really nice story where we put out this 300-word summary of on the physics of champagne, and it was distributed through one of the news broker service for science called Alpha Galileo, and it got picked up by the New York Times. So the scientists got a really nice little snippet in the New York Times based on the original 300-word summary we had produced. I mean, we've worked with EPJ for quite some time, so we have a lot of experience with them. And you can see on the screen, there's other cases where we had video combined with summary. We've also done a different kind of format for another client. In this case, it's some Elsevier journal, and it's a different approach because what they wanted is more of a news story, something that's easy to read, easy to share, and that also involves quoting the scientists so that the piece is more readable, more accessible. And we're doing this on a regular basis now, and the service is quite extensive in that it's not only just the writing of the news story that we get involved in, but also the cherry picking, the selection of the most interesting of the research paper that come out of that particular stable of journal, because the people who do write those news stories are fully fledged journalists. And they have the capability to understand the science because most of them are trained as scientists, very often have a PhD, but also they have experience of working in the media and they have experience sometimes of working in science publishing. So they combine these two unique skills in the one person. And our entire community of science journalists and editors are actually exercising their skills when creating stories on behalf of publishers or authors. So now I'm going to give you another example of the kind of content we've done, just to show you that it's always about an author, but it can be expressed in many different guises. In this case, this was a book review that was written by one of our writers, and it really helped bring the book to life and make people feel like reading more of this. In addition to that, we've also done something that's more author-centric. If you look at this was a publisher that specializes in communicating the findings of EU-funded research programs. And we used to do a lot of Q&A, straight Q&A around interesting research thematic. In this case, it was health economics. For the top left corner, and on the bottom right corner, we had a slightly different approach in that we wrote a profile. So the difference between a straight Q&A and a profile is that a profile is very much designed to tell the story of a scientist, going back to the days where they chose to become scientists and trying to explain what motivated them to become scientists in the first place. And that makes them come across as being more human and more endearing to the target audience. So it's quite an effective way of communicating. Here I have another example of podcast articles. We used to run a magazine called Euroscientist on behalf of a non-profit association of scientists called Euroscience. And we did quite a few of these podcast interviews. putting the scientists at the core and asking them topical questions. You can see Cédric Villani, who's a medal field scientist from France, among others in this slide. And finally, another format that we've worked on quite a bit is the video interview. The beauty of a video interview is that you're not just confined to asking questions and having the answer from the scientist, but you also can bring in some footage, either produced by the researcher. In this case, this scientist was working on marine science, studying the coral reefs, and we're able to put some beautiful pictures together with the actual voiceover from the scientists and their answers to our questions. So to cut a long story short, essentially bringing this post-publication content to complement your original research literature really does a few things quite helpful. First of all, it raises the profile of the work by an average of 30%. This is our own estimate based on the feedback we've got from our own client. It also, by using our platform, because it's a centralized cloud-based platform that allows to put together teams of people to deliver the content I've shown you, you can decrease the turnaround time in terms of delivery of the content by 50%. And of course, last but not least, there's a clear benefit in that it takes 80% less time to source the right talent, because our community is already present on our website, on our platform. So it's a matter of doing a keyword search for someone with the right scientific expertise, sometimes the right language expertise, and allocating them the job. So I'll show you later in the presentation how our platform actually, what it looks like and how it functions. And based on our experience and on experience of other people doing similar work, we've estimated that for a plain language summary, for instance, to be added to a peer review research paper increases the number of downloads by 23%. This is based on a single study that Kudos did in PLOS quite a while back in August 2017 or 2018. But that's not the only piece of evidence. We've actually gathered our own anecdotal evidence based on feedback from other clients, said that they reckon that the number of downloads was up by 35% in their case. So, you know, that's what we get, a figure of about 30% increase in the number of usage of the original research when you add on one of those summaries, one of those interviews, one of those pieces of exciting and compelling content that is added to the original piece of work. Now, we've also had data from some of our clients who are developing videos summarizing the content of research papers. We actually write scripts for these clients, and they reckon that there's the frequency of access to their article increases by 80% when there is a video summary, and they end up, the articles end up ranking 18% higher if they have such video summary. So it's not something that is negligible, and it makes a huge difference to usage of the original work. So just to give you an idea of the people we work with, we obviously work with the biggest players. I mean, these are only two examples, but not necessarily only the biggest player. We also have a relationship with smaller publishers, and we like the fact that they have versatility and the ability to adopt a new innovative format as well to tell the stories of the research that they publish. So really, the problem we're solving for a lot of our clients is to create more content in less time without compromising on quality. As I explained in the process that we go through to create any of these digital news stories or digital pieces of content, we always relate back to the scientists for quality control. And that really makes a huge difference on the end product. And this is something people notice when they work with us. It's like there is a certain high level quality that they don't always find elsewhere. Or if they try to do it in-house, they may not have the time to do it themselves. So that's what brought us to think about catering for people who may not have the resources to have a team of writer, editor, proofreader put together for every single piece of content they need to produce, and to try and find ways to automate part of the process to decrease the costs. And this is why we turned into artificial intelligence. So could technology be the solution? As you may know, there's a report produced by McKinsey in 2017 that estimated that 50% of our work activities can be automated, and that by using algorithms that we already have today. And the trouble is, as we've witnessed in our own industry, the trouble is that not all available AI technologies have been yet adopted by our technology. And this is what really drove me to look into more details when it comes to using AI to optimize our processes, our editorial processes, but also save time and effort. So before I go further on the topic of AI, I just wanted to give you a few definitions, because I think it always helps. There is a lot of sub-fields in AI, and I chose to focus on two of these sub-fields. One is called natural language processing, which is typically algorithm that help machines understand the general meaning of text written by humans. In other words, that's the natural language part. And the other part of subdivision of AI that we looked into was the natural language generation. And that's really algorithms that are designed to turn structured templated data into a digestible narrative, which looks like it was written by humans. And to give you an example of natural language generation, I'd like to revert back to the first automated news report that was done in 2014. And at that time, there was an earthquake that happened in the LA region. So a journalist at the LA Times called Ken Schwenker had developed an algorithm called QuakeBot, capable of writing a report on that particular earthquake. And all it did is really take a publicly available feed from the US Geological Survey, extract the data. It was, in this case, an earthquake of magnitude 4.7. It happened in a particular area in California, so the name of the location was also extracted. And then they plugged in that data into a pre-templated news story, which means that the actual news story was published on the website of the LA Times before the journalist was even out of bed that morning. And of course, I mean, this is quite limited, but it allows to get the news first online, and then possibly for the journalist to dig into the story at a later stage. But that's just a classic example of natural language generation. Now, at SciencePOD, we felt that this is really a very useful tool, but that not maybe the best suited tool for telling the stories of research, particularly because the complexity of the data in research papers does not always lend itself to automated news writing. So instead, we asked the question, could we raise the profile of scientists by using another branch of AI, the natural language processing? And this is exactly what we did. We've developed a prototype to automatically extract meaningful sentences from research paper using state-of-the-art algorithm and turn them into research summaries. I'm sure you're very curious to see what these look like, so I brought you a sample. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the original research paper that was used for this exercise. On the right-hand side, we've replicated the title. And then, because we're true to our mission to make science available to audience who are not specialists in the field of the author, what we've done is we've provided context. So context come in the form of keywords. As you can see, they're the most important keywords extracted from the text automatically. Then context come in the form of spelling out the acronyms that were part of the original piece of research. And also, when you look further down, you see ontology in big capital letters. So what these ontologies are, they're basically definitions in plain language of the most technical words in the paper. So if you look at the last ontology, the word molecular dynamics, it really gives you an idea about what this is about. So, and finally, the sentences in color, in red, in yellow, and green are the actual summary. So I can reassure you that no human was harmed in the process. Actually, only the scientist who did the algorithm actually sweated quite a bit to make this happen. But this is quite an interesting result in that it's our first generation summary, and it allows someone who's not skilled in the art of the discipline to still understand what the research paper was about. And now this brings me on to my conclusion that there is a good news and a bad news in this. For people who are, like myself, professionally make a living from creating content, it's good news because the algorithms are a long way from writing proficiently. And you can imagine that the algorithm will just support the work of writers and editors rather than replacing them. The bad news is more for publishers who are always trying to cut cost because the algorithms are a long way from writing proficiently. So it's very clear that AI is not going to take over anytime soon, but it's also very clear that it can potentially augment our capacity to an extent that we can save time and effort. And there's a very clear rationale for summarization of research paper. First of all, there's a clear potential help provided to authors. You can imagine having this automated summary sent to the author for editing to refine them. And then authors themselves can share them within their community on social media and try and stimulate further multidisciplinary research by making their work accessible to people who are not experts in their field. And of course, they can be more accountable to the likes of funding agencies. But there's another reason why these summaries could be helpful. A lot of scientists depend on literature searches, and they have to go through so many different papers. These sort of summaries could potentially help them curate the most relevant studies, but that can also help publishers who need to select the best papers to highlight or promote, or turn into news stories or press releases. And potentially, you can imagine that some publishers may decide that summarization is a good way for pre-assessing a paper when it's submitted before the peer review takes place. There's another rationale for using the kind of summaries the way we've structured them is because we can extract the most important keywords. We can also imagine putting these keywords in the metadata so that the papers become more easily discoverable. So again, this helps the original work gain a larger and more diverse readership. But above all, if we combine our strengths between the SciencePOD platform, which has this community of professional science writers and editors, and the summarization piece, then we could potentially anticipate that this is going to help publishers save a lot of time and effort and cost when they want to create content for content marketing. And that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. We are combining these two elements so that we can create more stories at a reduced price because we have the summary as a starting point. So I'm going to give you a preview of what my platform looks like. On the one hand, this is a tool that allows to create a brief, and you can see it at the bottom of the screen. There's a brief, and then reach out to the right talent from our community through a keyword search. You can see on the top left corner of the navigation tool, there's a creator search option. Allocate the job to a writer, an editor, and a proofreader from the community. And as you can see in the middle of the screen, what our platform does very well as well is to establish a workflow, a preset workflow for the quality control of every piece of digital story we produce through our platform, with an editor intervening after a writer, and they do this iterative writer-editor job before the piece gets proofread. So ultimately, by creating those digital stories, what we managed to do is to open new audiences to publishers by taking science out of its silo. And this means that there's more accountability to scientists from other disciplines, to policymakers, to funders, to collaborators from industry, to students, and to the wider public. So we're bringing back original content to a new level. And I believe this is how science publishing is evolving in itself. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or any comments, I'd be delighted to respond. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sabine. SciencePOD certainly seems to be a very interesting and helpful organisation. Ingenta will actually have more webinars. We've got more free webinars scheduled over the coming months, so please check them out on our events page, and also to make sure that you register for these on the Ingenta YouTube channel, where you'll be able to hear other previous webinars we've actually done as well. We've also got our Twitter feed, so please check out the @WeAreIngenta. And if you're interested in any Ingenta platform or some of our latest products like Ingenta Connect Unity, please contact us at info@ingenta.com. Be grateful if you can join us for our next webinar, but for this one, thank you very much. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Bye.